Hi, and welcome to Magic Numbers. This is episode number 105, and today I have a very special guest. And just to introduce him, one of the players that came out of this great crucible of California Magic grinders somewhere in the 90s, uh, became a pro, and also gained a lot of success in content creation. He is very iconic as a pair with Marshall Sutcliffe. And I wish to say that he's universally adored and beloved by Magic players across the world. But unfortunately, Paul Cheon couldn't join. Still, like 3 out of 4 is not bad. So here is Luis Scott-Vargas.
That's one of the best podcast intros I've ever heard, Sirkovitz.
I was working on it while I was walking my dog earlier. So we are going to talk about Cube today because I am not a Cube player. When I was playing in my first Magic life, Cube was not a thing. Then I was retired, and then Cube became a thing. And then I came back, and I sort of never got into Cube properly because there was not so many opportunities for someone that doesn't play Magic Online. And Arena Cube, it was very difficult for me to grasp it. That's why I am always inviting someone that I respect their opinion on the Cube. So far, of my guests that I invited to talk about Cube, I have 100% success rate of them becoming the world champion the same year. So no pressure there, Luis, because last time I had it with Jean Manuel. So hopefully this will bring you some good fortune for the rest of the season, and we can end up with having you on a card, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, being world champion is actually one of the it's actually the thing I want most that I have not achieved in Magic. You know, I had a list of things you'd want to do, and I feel like I've done a pretty good job of checking those things off the boxes or checking the boxes off the list. But the closest I came was when I top 8'd Worlds in 2011, and I lost in the quarters, and that did not unfortunately materialize. So. Well, I'm still in the hunt, I guess.
Well, you see, I'm trying to help. I know that I have a good track record of making sure that someone will become a world champion. So hopefully you next year. Right. Before we go into the topic. If in doubt, consult the expert. That's something that we should do more often. And I could easily wing it and just take some arena data, look at the win rates, and talk straight from the depths of my lack of expertise and pretend I know about it. But if I don't know about something, I'm just going to basically lean on the expertise of someone else because I think that's only fair to people that are my listeners. And it's hard to think of someone that is better as a Cube expert than you are, actually. I would say that begrudgingly. So with that, we can maybe dive into the slides that I prepared. And we haven't had Arena Cube since August last year. So it's been a while. There was a Chromatic Cube, but that's a completely different animal altogether. And since the last iteration of the Cube, there were 94 cards removed. Roughly around 10 of them in each color. There are 17 lands, removed from the previous version, plus the 9 colorless cards and 19 multicolor. And maybe I wanted to start, and obviously these were replaced, but not completely. There's fewer cards in this version of the Cube. They put 16 lands back, and we're going to talk about maybe specifics, which of those were put in. So roughly 1-for-1 swaps, but I don't think that those swaps were equal on the power level. So I think that the current iteration is going to be rebalanced, and maybe we can start chatting about cards that were removed and cards that were put back into the Cube or put in the Cube for the first time, and maybe some of your opinions about those cards and what do you think they might be changing in the whole setup.
Certainly. And even before we jump into this, sorry to interrupt this lovely slideshow. I'm not used to a podcast that's quite this level of preparation. I could spend a little bit talking about kind of how I see the overall Arena Cube, because it is quite different from the Vintage Cube. I love both those activities. I play a lot more Vintage Cube, but last time the Arena Cube was up, I played it. I loved playing the Arena Open of the format. And what I think is the Arena Cube keeps getting more and more powerful over time, which I think is awesome, because the first iteration of Arena Cube they put up, I didn't really get into too much. The cards just kind of weren't good enough. It just felt like a weirdly curated limited format, but we're well past that, where all the Arena Cube cards, not all, but like just about all of them have the right combination of power level and kind of recognizability. I think one of the things that's important for cubes when you curate them is people kind of want to see the cards they play in Constructed or the cards that they really liked out of Limited shown in those cubes. Part of the reason some of the cards stay in cubes maybe even longer than they would on strict power level is they're just iconic. Like, I don't know, Upheaval in the Vintage Cube is pretty iconic. It's kind of hard to imagine cutting that, even if maybe at some point it's not quite good enough. Well, this Arena Cube, mainly what I feel like is you got to interact early and often. You either can play aggro, and as you have told us on previous shows, and I'm sure you're going to tell us now, the mono white and mono red strategies are really strong. You can play those. You can also play mid-range, which is where I end up a lot of the time, where you really prioritize cards like Flame Slash or Portable Hole or, Virtue of Persistence, now that that's in the cube, like early interaction, so that you can leverage your like 3, 4, and 5 mana plays. Not as often the 6 mana or more plays. I don't find that like a hard control deck is going to be as good. If you have enough early interaction, it can be good. Most of the time, though, I'm looking at cards that play to the board, cards that interact with their creatures, cards that cost 1 or 2 mana, and then cards that cost a little bit more as my threats. So that's kind of how I view a lot of these cards. And as we talk about the cards, that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I think that also because the card pool in this cube is mainly from the sets that were released during the Arena era. And I think that those sets were not very conducive of pure control in general. So they don't have this, like the powerful spells for control. They were late 90s, early 2000s or something.
Yeah, there's no Swords to Plowshares. There is Counterspell.
Actually, swords are in the swords.
Sorry, yes, that was a recent addition. But one other thing I want to mention that's very different, especially if you come from a Vintage Cube background, is there aren't that many really strong synergies. Normally, when you think of Vintage Cube, a lot of the cards you think of are like Flash plus World Spineworm, Sneak Attack plus Emrakul, and that's where 2 cards that do nothing on their own combine to win you the game. Arena Cube is really not like that. There's not that many combos I look for. I don't really put a high value on synergy. You kind of want your cards to stand on their own. You can have like an overall deck that's like, for example, I'm a red-blue deck that cares about casting spells. I've got some early plays like Young Pyromancer type cards or Dragon's Rage Channeler, a couple counter spells, a couple removal. Yeah, I would consider that a synergy deck, but you're not talking about cards that are zeros that combine with other zeros to make 10s. There's just not almost any examples of that. And the decks they've tried to seed, the like black-white life gain or tokens, have mostly not worked in my experience. Sometimes they can, but most of the time, if you look at a card and it's like, this looks too cute, or this looks like you would need other cards to make it work and it doesn't do much on its own, those are not typically cards I gravitate towards in the Arena Cube. I kind of want my cards to work just because there's not as many really rewarding combos.
Yeah, I think it might be the part of their strategy that they want the Arena Cube to be power and then Tinkerer's Cube more synergy based or something like that. That might be this might be the reason. Right. So first, couple of cards that were removed from white, and especially I love that card. Clarion Spirit was removed. It was actually one of the most high win rate cards in the whole cube. It was approaching top 10, if not top 10 itself in terms of game in hand. That was removed. And Heliod Suncrown. Another, like, this is the kind of a card that I would expect will have some kind of synergy combos, and that's gone. And
yeah, Clarion Spirit was really good. The first thing I thought was like, oh, well, they didn't remove Clarion Spirit based on power level. They just decided maybe that wasn't the play experience they wanted. That card was strong. Whenever your opponent on turn 3 went Clarion Spirit plus 1-drop, it was just like, well, I'm not beating that.
And Heliod, will you miss it at all? Or was it just...
I never played that card, and I was usually pretty happy when my opponent cast it against me.
There you go. What has been added is Sanguine Evangelist. That's a pretty decent replacement for Clarion Spirit in terms of the power level, because it's for 3 mana. It makes roughly the same as Clarion Spirit did. It makes it 2-power creature and a 1/1 flyer. Plus it has the battle cry. Plus it will also create a bat on the death trigger. So I think that this is 1-to-1 replacement, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, actually added Sanguine Evangelist to my Vintage Cube, and it's earned a spot for the time being. So the card is not weak. It interacts well against removal. It's great in any complicated combat situation by putting a lot of blockers out. And it's a 4-power creature kind of on its own. If it attacks with just the bat, that's 4 damage. And often it comes out after another creature or two. So I really like the combination of a card that is good if it attacks and it punishes the opponent for killing it. So either way, they're a bit caught in a bind there.
And Sunfall?
Sunfall is just a great card. That's actually also in my Vintage Cube right now. Both these cards I think are good enough for Vintage Cube. So that's a pretty good selling point. There's not very many cards that are power level good enough for Vintage Cube that aren't for Arena Cube. The exceptions would be like combo parts, though. I guess sneak attack exists on Arena now. They could do a sneak attack thing
technically. Right. In blue, there's been some cards removed. None of them were super high win rate, but I think that a couple of them
man,
were
I love
maybe
the Haughty Djinn.
Potentially. A Haughty Djinn is something that blue might want to do if there is some kind of a blue spells archetype, and removing that means that probably they don't want to make a spells archetype. And impulse going is probably also sort of testament that combo is not what they are wanting to promote.
Instead of impulse, I would just usually play decks where I wanted to draw all my cards and not spend mana, upgrading from whatever this would have been to whatever I would find. I just didn't feel like in Arena Cube you had the time to do that.
Reality Chip, was it useful
unplayable
anywhere?
No, completely terrible.
What they put instead was Malcolm, Alluring Scoundrel, giving more like aggro tempo kind of feel with a flashy 2/1 flyer. Probably not powerful enough for the Vintage Cube, but Confounding Riddle, that's a bit of a
that one's also in the Vintage Cube, by the way.
Confounding Riddle?
No, Malcolm.
Oh, is it? Wow.
It enables Reanimator.
Of course it does.
It replaced Looteril Core or Suspicious Stowaway, whichever one you want to say.
Oh, yeah, okay. Confounding Riddle, do you think that it's...
This one looks pretty weak to me. So the problem with Confounding Riddle is like, it's flexible where it can be a counterspell or a card draw spell, kind of like Supreme Will. It's a little better, I guess. Supreme Will makes you pay 3 and just puts in the graveyard. So it's an upgrade there, but I also thought Supreme Will was on the weak side.
I mean,
I just don't think counterspells are that good in the Arena Cube. Some of them are, like the 2-mana ones are, but like the 3-mana ones are just not.
We're going to see some data because I'm going to show you the win rates of cards by color, and we can speculate a bit on what's going to be powerful. Hornlock Whale, we're just another control card that we don't know if control is going to be strong enough, I guess.
This is a really strong card, though. Having a 2-mana removal spell against aggro, which is exactly what this deck wants, and a big finisher later, that's a good combination. It's a kind of like, the Black Virtue, Locthwain Sworn, Virtue Persistence, where it just does what you want early and what you want late. That one is better on both sides, so it's a better card, but Hornlock Whale is still pretty good.
And then, again, like Malcolm and Confounding Riddle, both of them would be pretty decent in some sort of Reanimator deck, but I just don't see that there is any kind of Reanimator deck, so it's a bit of a weird that you are fueling your graveyard and there is no payoff. That's a bit strange to me. Okay. In black, the important card that was removed, the Shambling Gust. That was the probably highest win rate black card that was removed from the cube. And I also put Rotting Regisaur as sort of like they are killing the dream of black aggro, I guess. That for some reason they always promise you that there might be this black aggro, but also it never works somehow.
Yeah, I don't think either of these cards are that impressive. The Regisaur was fine. Like against like red-green, you could just kind of play this card and they couldn't really deal with it. You could often win a race or whatever. Shambling Ghast was actually a card I played a decent amount, but I wouldn't really say I'm going to miss it.
Yeah, but solid role player. It had actually a decent win rate, but I think that mostly because probably better group of players recognize that it's valuable to be played in the cube, and they had just generically higher win rate, not because Shambling Ghast was such a broken card. What is added in black, and I think that there's really some good black cards being added to the cube. Like the power of things that are added outweighs the power of things that are removed by quite a lot. And Preacher of the Schism, that's the card that you wanted to talk about, actually, so you have an opportunity now. Is it in the Vintage Cube?
It is not in the Magic Online Vintage Cube. It's in my list, which we've been playing a lot and I've been tinkering with. And I suspect Preacher of the Schism is going to be in the next Magic Online Cube. I'd be pretty surprised if it wasn't. The card actually just delivers. 3-mana 2/4 Death Touch is really hard to beat in combat. And if it ever attacks, you get a substantial bonus, sometimes even both. If your life totals are tied, you can get both of the triggers, get a card and a 1/1. I kind of like the card. Actually, all 3 of these cards are in the Vintage Cube and they all kind of earned their spot.
Yeah, also Mike Provencher in the chat says that they are surprised they didn't add the Deep Cavern Bat. And I was also surprised. I was like sure that they are going to add the Deep Cavern Bat. And I think...
Yeah, that's shocking. That card's really good.
I know. I love it. I had 3 in my last draft and I loved every single one of them. I named them. Red. This is a very interesting color because red had some cards removed that were really, really strong. I mean... both Kumano Faces Kakazan and Phoenix of Ash were in the top 10 cards of the whole cube. Actually, Kumano Faces Kakazan was the highest win rate card in the whole cube in the last iteration, and they removed it, which doesn't seem to me like it is an accidental thing. They wanted to nerf red down and remove some power from the red beatdown.
Yeah, this card was always one that I was scared to see on turn 1. Phoenix of Ash is pretty replaceable, so that's whatever. I did feel a bit like I'm not surprised red and white aggro is so good, because the threats that they've gotten over the past couple of years, just even in the standalone, like the normal sets, not even like the weird supplementary products, were all pretty good. And I would expect blue and green to kind of be behind based on that in terms of power levels, just because you can even see this in Vintage Cube, where like all the best creatures are recently printed red and white creatures generally, and all the best spells are like the old spells, like you mentioned. So given that Arena Cube only has half that equation, I don't actually mind cutting back on like 1-drop red aggro being so good, because and like we mentioned kind of in the preamble to the show before we went live, Ragavan not in the cube is like a conscious choice, where it's like, yeah, Ragavan would just be the best card in the cube probably. So no real reason to do that to people looking to play a little Arena Cube.
What they added, it's not that they didn't add some power in red. It's just maybe more like a mid-range kind of power. Also, Godric was a perfect combo with the Kumano, because you play Kumano on 1 and then it flips on turn 3 just in time to play Godric, so you got the celebration trigger. So maybe that's why also Kumano faces Kakazan was cut. But they put Inti, Seneschal of the Sun, the new poster boy for being an awesome card in like multiple formats.
Inti is amazing. I love Inti. It's such a good card.
Yeah, I mean, I played it in a couple of formats. I actually played Slogurk in Standard, and it does weird things in there. Godric, just an aggro card, very solid. And of course, Bonehorde Dracosaur, the new king of bombs that you managed to spoil. Does it show any kind of direction according to you, the removal of the Kumano and adding of those cards?
Well, I mean, Inti's great no matter what, so that's kind of a wash. Godric's a bit on the aggressive side. Bonehorde Dracosaur is actually more on the expensive side, so maybe opening the door for like more rampy red decks or more mid-range red decks. I could see that, because Kumano faces Kakazan's a very like one-note aggressive card. You'd only play this in aggro decks. Yeah. The other ones,
they removed Atsushi, the Kamigami on Dynasty Dragon, and put in Dracosaur instead, I guess. So that's the change that they made in terms of 1 mana more, but more power and more sort of grindy kind of game. I mean, grindy. The grind doesn't take very long with the Dracosaur, but it's not like super aggressive. It's doing the full package of value basically.
Yeah.
Then green cards that were removed. I mean, I put those two because I don't know, for some reason they're liked by some people. Also, Tarmogoyf and Inti is a nice combo. I heard in Timeless.
It is.
But Tarmogoyf is out. It had a very bad win rate in the last iteration. Ramunap Excavator also is out, and it also had very bad numbers.
Ramunap never made that much sense to me. Like, what were you supposed to be doing with this card?
I have no idea.
I didn't get it.
I have no idea. But what they put in is, first of all, they put in Questing Beast, which is, I assume, a power choice. They wanted to put something powerful at 4 mana, and they didn't have anything new. So they put Questing Beast out of the archive of the actual original Eldraine. But they put a couple of new cards. Cenote Scout, a good 1-drop. That's something that was not really popular in... Like, the good 1-drops in the cube are Llanowar Elves and other types of elves, basically. So this time is the good, aggressive 1-drop, potentially at least. And they put Sentinel of the Nameless City. That's another card that, I don't know if it's in the Vintage Cube, but it definitely is that power.
It has a little extra context in Vintage Cube because making artifacts in a world of Urzas and Tolarian Academies matters. But I will say this card, Sentinel, just gets played in most mid-range green decks because it's kind of like 4-5-ish worth of stats, sometimes more over the course of the turns. Even if they kill it, you got a little bit of value. I actually like Sentinel. It plays really well. The one card here that I'm really confused about is Cenote Scout. What I don't really understand, like, what are you supposed to do with this card? It's not good in a green ramp deck. And is there a green beatdown deck? Like,
I guess that's what they're trying to tell us. I mean,
is there other support? If there's more support for like a green aggressive deck, I could see that. not that taking Tarmogoyf out really changes that much one way or another. We'll have to look, but my guess is I would place a Note Scout if I thought my deck just needed a little bit of early blocking, but it's just not that strong of a card, I don't think.
I mean, no, from what I see, that what they put, like they put Huntsman Redemption from WoW, they put Bramble Familiar, they put the Paleontologist from LCI, so a bunch of ramp things. And Huntsman Redemption is sort of playing together with the ramp strategy because you can sacrifice your elf and find the whatever 8-mana creature you are playing, and play it later. So I don't see that there is anything that would say, yeah, that's an aggressive strategy. There's like Pelt Collector, and that's more or less it in terms of aggressive one drops from the cube.
Yeah, I love Questing Beast. That's a great addition.
Well, that's good. Colorless, one really notable removed card, that's Cityscape Leveler. And Sword of Fire and Ice had decent numbers. They also removed the other sword from the cube, so we are currently swordless in this particular cube.
It's okay. The swords are mediocre anyway. As it turns out, you can't spend 5 mana at sorcery speed and connect in games where you're losing to like change the outcome that much. So,
but Cityscape Leveler was a decent sort of award for ramping, I guess.
Yeah, it was all right. I'm not going to miss it.
Are you thrilled to see Agatha's Soul Cauldron? Because I didn't see anything that would like play so well with. They didn't even put the untapped fairy for this. So at least you got.
Yeah, I don't really know what you're supposed to do with Soul Cauldron. Like some of the better things to use are like, and I know they're not in the Arena Cube. I'm like talking like Gristlebrand is actually like a really kind of cute one. Urza is a kind of cool one. Walking Ballista, but I think the fact that there's not really a good graveyard deck, I don't really know why you would need Graveyard Hate. So my guess is Agatha Soul Cauldron gets to be like last pick most of the time, or like not very powerful. Chimmel the Inner Sun's interesting. I wanted to try it in Vintage Cube, but it's not actually good enough. But it does seem like in Arena Cube, I would try playing this. The fact that it's end of turn is pretty nice.
I was just checking if the Golos is in it, but I don't think even Golos is in it. So
yeah, Soul Cauldron does not sound great then.
Oh well, they put it. We'll see it, and probably it will be out, and maybe it will be. Oh, Golos is in. Okay, that's good. I didn't see it on the list somehow, but also I can't scroll through the list and listen to you and reply at the same time. I'm getting confused. So cards that were removed in multicolor. The card with the I think highest win rate from the ones that were removed is Lorehold Command. That's another sort of nerf for the red-white aggro, because that was frequently splashed in mono red or mono white as a top end. The other card I put, well, mainly because of the love to that card in the community, Tatyova is out, and I think it was about time because it had pretty bad numbers, but people like Tatyova because value and card draw, why not? And Kami War as a sort of 5-color payoff, that's also out. I don't think that these will be missed, although Lorehold Command was pretty good.
Yeah, but like, could a red-white deck casting a 5-mana spell probably pretty happy with their position most of the time? I don't think Lorehold Command did anything particularly special.
No, I mean you get Glory Bringer as a 5-mana alternative for that easily. What they put in.
Hold on, I gotta get close to my screen. I gotta. What is this card? Let me see.
Jewel Mine Overseer, 1 red and a white. I have to read it.
Puts a bunch of 7 dwarves into your deck.
Yeah, it enters the battlefield. You conjure 7 cards, name 7 dwarf on top of your library.
I get that they cantrip now, but like
they get a cantrip now. So they basically, when the dwarf enters the battlefield, you draw a card. But also at the beginning of your upkeep, you exile the top card of your library, and you may play this card this turn. So you basically sort of draw 2 cards per turn when you have this Jewel Mine Overseer, and it's actually a 3-mana 3/3. So it's a pretty, I would say, decent card for aggro decks.
Yeah, this card looks really strong. I mean, it's a 3-mana 3/3 that, if it's in play, kind of like Lelia's You, right? Where you get to exile the top card every turn and you get to play it. But also puts a bunch of cantrip creatures into your deck, like 2-mana 2/2 draw cards that, if they combine, they're even bigger. Yeah, I guess you would always play this card. It seems fine.
And then Huatli was another card that I count as a multicolor card that they put into the cube. I think it was pretty strong in LCI, so I assumed it's going to be quite strong as a value mid-range kind of card for a maybe multicolor deck, because it allows you to search library for a basic when it ETBs, so you will get your fixing partially. on a good body that later turns into many dinosaurs that will have double strike. So yeah, I guess it'll be fine. So lands, there's a reshuffle in lands. So there are 17 lands being removed. Mainly there are 3 cycles of 5 each. The cycle lands from Amonkhet removed, all of them. These were neighboring colors and with cycling with types. Fast lands from Phyrexia LB1 are removed. The Seachrome Coast is an example. Also the friendly colored, they enter untapped if you control 2 or fewer other lands. And the sacrifice to draw a card lands from, is it Modern Horizons 2? 5 of those in enemy colors, they were removed as well. But what we get back is 10 creature lands from LCI and Wilds of Eldraine, and 5 fetch lands. And I think that putting fetch lands into the format is a big game, isn't it?
Yeah, one of the things that's really cool about being able to play online is, I think, well, there's a long conversation of whether fetch lands were a good thing to print ever because of all the additional shuffling. Like, I actually think you could make a pretty good argument that it really sucks.
It works on Arena easily, though.
That's my point, is that, yes, exactly. That online fetch lands are just great, and they do cool things. One of the things that's really cool about fetch lands is, by themselves, yes, a polluted delta is a island or swamp, and you pay a life to get the privilege of choosing which one, right? But the fact that you can now be like, oh, I grabbed a breeding pool, so now my delta is a black-green land for my black-green deck is like a really neat interplay. And then also getting to shuffle, getting to replay lands or getting lands out of your graveyards with various effects. Fetch lands are just really cool. They double trigger landfall. So adding them in, I think, goes a long way in making this feel like the cube experience.
Yeah, maybe finally the Ramunap Explorer would have been good in this iteration with fetch lands if you managed to nab a couple. Obviously, 10 triumphs are in the format, so polluted delta technically would be able to fix you for any color you like if you draft correctly.
Yeah, I mean, having triumphs makes the fetch lands even higher picks. Like, I'm always beating the drum of like, you should be taking lands super high. If you're listening to this and you're about to do some arena cubing, like, you should have a pretty good reason not to be first picking fetch lands in packs where you can.
And what about the creature lands? I know that there were a couple of creature lands already before, the Lair of the Hydra, the whatever, Den of the Bugbear, and they had quite a high win rate in general. And now we have 10 more of those, but in 2 colors and slightly slower potentially.
Yeah, I like creature lands. They play well.
Okay, so I will focus on a couple of categories of the data just to look at what people tend to value in the cube and maybe have your opinion about why people are wrong.
Okay.
Or why they are right, potentially. So I'm going to look at ALSA. I'm going to look at what percentage of the time do people pick a card when they see it. And then also I'm going to look at what percentage of the time when they pick a card, they put it in their deck to sort of like look at this double value, because some cards are going to be really, really good in a very small section of decks. So you sometimes pick them, but only maybe 20% of the time you will play them in your deck, or 15%. So risky picks that can pay off quite big, but maybe be a complete flop in other situations. Then we're going to look maybe a bit on card win rates and look at each color and each card category and see which cards were good and bad in the previous iteration, and then maybe you can tell your ideas about some of those cards. We're going to go through all of them. There's like 500 cards in this cube. First, the general picture of what was desired by the people. ALSA, for those of you that don't know, ALSA is based on every single user of Arena, because 17 lands collects the data from all the drafts, and ALSA will tell you how people pick it, and not only the 17 lands user. So this is like a screenshot of what the general population that plays Cube on Arena is picking highly. And these are the cards with ALSA below 5. And the lower the ALSA, the more desirable the card is. So cards with ALSA 1 are always first picked, basically. So first of all, red was not very desired in terms of cards that were in red. Only 16% of the red cards were with ALSA under 5. And red was the most powerful deck, which tells you something about general Arena population. I don't know if they knew or they didn't know that red was powerful, because I can imagine people not picking red, not because they they think it's bad, but also because maybe they want to do something else because there are so many fun things to do than playing mono red. They decided not to draft mono red. But the truth is that red was not super highly drafted, and lots of those high win rate red cards were going pretty late in the draft. And the opposite end of the spectrum, like 30% of the black and green cards had alpha of under 5. And then white and blue were somewhere in the middle with 20%, 27% of the cards in those colors having alpha of under 5. Colorless cards, obviously they have a lower alpha because they can go into every deck, so people pick them quite early because they always think that they can put it in their deck. And flip side of the same argument, multicolor cards, only 10% of multicolor cards on the cube had alpha of under 5 because you don't want to pick them too early, especially in pack 1, because you don't want to declare yourself as a white-red drafter after 2 picks. And 4% of lands only had alpha of under 5.
That's going to go up with the fetch lands, I would imagine.
You would hope, but
yes.
Yeah. Then I did the same for cards with alpha of over 6, so the cards that go quite late in the draft, and obviously it's slightly inverted. Around 75% of the multicolors and lands have alpha of over 6. 20% of colorless cards only have the alpha of over 6. And like half of red cards have alpha of over 6, which means that on average you will see them around pick 6. Without going too complicated with the numbers behind it. And black cards, only 30% of the black cards had alpha of over 6. So black cards were picked quite early. And this is something that we see in almost every set. That there is a general population on Arena blind preference towards playing black somehow. And I don't know if it's like love of the color or is it love of removal or of particular types of cards, but black on average, if I would go to the new format and I wouldn't know if black is a good color or not, I would err on the side of not drafting black just because it will be most likely overdrafted at least very early. Did you observe anything like this?
I did find that blue-white was a bit underdrafted, and I didn't end up drafting black all that much. I think there wasn't that many cards in black that I would really draw me in. In fact, I sent you a list of like, I'm not saying the top 3 cards of each color or anything like that, but like 3 of the cards I want to talk about for each color, and all the black cards, 2 of the 3 black cards were new and these were the cards that kind of jumped out at me. Just Fatal Push.
I still don't know which Shieldred you meant.
Oh, the good one.
Okay, the good one, the 4 mana one then.
Yeah, I don't think there's any other Shieldreds actually. But
it's decent, the 5 mana one.
I find myself like, if a lot of how you start in cubes will depend on what are the like super premium cards. So like in Vintage Cube, you open a piece of power, you're generally going to take it, right? It's not going to be super complicated. And then it goes from there. It's like Minsk and Boo or like Fourth Ear Lingus, Demonic Tutor. Like we're starting to get into that category. For Arena Cube, where you'll end up often, it is very correlated with like, are there cards in the cube? Like Fable of the Mirror Breaker was a card I basically wouldn't pass in the cube. I just thought that it was just better than almost everything else that was going on out there. There's a lot of, a card like Lightning Bolt. Like I'm really going to be hard pressed to ever want to pass a Lightning Bolt. It's exactly what you want out of your 1-drop slot. So some of the colors like black didn't really have a card like that, or even cards in that category. Shieldred, the addition of Shieldred does change that a bit, but having an opportunity to start with one of the like super premium cards, one of the top 20 cards in the cube, means that you're going to be those colors a little bit more often because you're not going to be drawn into the archetypes that don't have those kinds of cards. And it's the same reason like multicolor also like is not a color that you generally want to start with.
Yeah, definitely. So from the previous iteration, the one from August, most desired card in all the cube was Shieldred the Apocalypse. And the second one was Fable of the Mirror Breaker. So the 2 cards that you mentioned, also the community evaluated them in a similar way. So at least there you go. Third one was Oracle of the Alpha. And that's one of the cards on your list that you wanted to talk about. So maybe you can... I'm not sold on that card at all.
So the reason I put it on the list is I agree with you that Oracle of the Alpha is going to be one of the most desired cards in the cube because it's so unbelievably fun. I don't think it's that good. Like, I don't think it's terrible, but It's not in the same level of basically any other card on this list.
I mean,
Not
if I could choose how many of the
utilized.
Power 9 I put, I would be more happy. I would not probably put 5 Moxen at this stage of the game. I want them to have mine on turn 1, not on turn like 7.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the power level balancing clearly with it is that they get to force you to play a bunch of Moxen and draw a bunch of Moxen late. But I think that Oracle of the Alpha is, I'm not going to ever say you shouldn't take it because it's obviously a lot of fun, but it's not that good. It's
Okay,
not.
for the people that don't know, it's like a 3 mana 2/3 flyer that when it ETBs, it shuffles a Power 9 into your library. Yep.
And when it attacks, you scry one.
Oh, and when it attacks, you can scry the Mox to the bottom.
The Moxes can be good. When you have Time Twister and you start casting Time Twisters, like the Moxes actually get kind of good. But yes, Oracle of the Alpha is kind of a weird outlier here. I do think that Fable and Swords to Plowshares are both better than Shield Grid for what it's worth. So the fact that they're not as desired, well, maybe that's some people underrating them. I'm a little confused why the Meat Hook Massacre is up here. I understand this is what people want, but why do so many people want the Meat Hook Massacre? It's not actually.
I think that it was having a big. Remember, Alsa is based not only on 17 lands users, but on every user of the arena. I'm pretty sure that if you would look at the pick rate of 17 lands user, the Meat Hook Massacre will go way down in the preference of the players. So I guess it's somewhat getting stuff from constructed onto the field of cube draft, and people know that this card was amazing and constructed in its time, and they want to draft it because of that, I guess. Key to the Archive is another card that was having a very low alpha of around like 3.2, and it had a pretty low win rate at the same time, so that was definitely overdrafted, and I also don't understand exactly why. There was a hype of that card for some time in
Look, Key to the Archive is also another one of those cards where like it could be anything. You could cast this, you could get the perfect card off it. And like I do think it was a good card. I don't think it was like a bomb necessarily, but it was a strong card.
Yeah, this reminds me of this Family Guy thing that when Peter had to choose between a boat and a box, and someone said, choose the box. It could be anything. It could even be a boat.
Exactly. I've used that quote so many times.
Yeah, there you go. Other cards on the list, Bone Crusher Giant. That's just a solid card. I guess if you want to go into red aggro. Wandering Emperor, is that something that draws you into white?
Yeah, Wandering Emperor is quite a strong card. It's it's good on the board. It can be good against control by being an end of turn threat. It's really good in creature mirrors because if you can ever play it and use the +1/+1 counter and first strike to win a fight, like you got a huge deal out of it. And I think it's an overall pretty good card. It's also, like you said, a constructed all-star that people on Arena are probably like, wow, this card is so good. Because I mean, there is some element to that. It's like part of why Cube is fun is you get to play with the same cards you know are good and constructed in limited.
Time Warp, is that basically the Time Walk in this Cube?
I mean, of sorts in that they have the same game text, but well, actually, technically Time Warp targets, I believe. So I think that Time Warp is a playable card if you can ever untap with a Planeswalker or some sort of. Oh man, Chimmel the Inner Sun, discover Time Warp end of turn. That's just game. That's this game right there. But I would say Time Warp is kind of like a reward for doing well in a game. And the cost you pay is that it's dead in your hand until you can cast it, and it costs 5 mana, so it's like kind of a brick. I would try to play that more often than not. It could lead to some pretty cool turns.
Chandra, Torture of Defiance, Sublime Epiphany, Counterspell. That's another card that slightly surprised me that it was so highly picked by.
It's just iconic, I would imagine. I think a Counterspell is actually a good card. It's one of the better reasons to be in heavy blue.
Arguably one of the better counterspells.
You could argue that, but I don't think its presence on this list is quite the same caliber as some of the cards on this list, though it is very good.
Isn't that weird that in this cube, the best Time Warp is 5 mana and the best counterspell is 2 mana, while in the Vintage cube, the best Time Warp is 2 mana and the best counterspell is 5 mana?
Yeah, no, that is true, and I do agree with you.
Great Henge, I guess also iconic. No?
Yeah, and the Great Henge is also one of those cards that like it has matchups where it's good. Any sort of green mirror, it's amazing. I don't really think this card is one you should take super early because it's a reward for drafting a big creature deck, which it doesn't always go well in these, and cheap removal can be really disruptive.
One other thing that I noticed that one card they didn't put in the cube, and I thought maybe they will, but they didn't. Up to Beanstalk, that did not get put in the cube. Do you think that they should put it, or is it just not powerful enough?
I think you could put it in the cube. I don't think it would be very good. You need some pitch spells to really make it go.
No, please don't put them on Arena. We have the least desired cards, and I'm not going to go super deep on them, apart from the fact that a couple of them were actually also good in terms of win rate. The least desired card was Knight of the Reliquary. It was also one of the lowest win rate cards in this Arena.
There's just no support. It was like there's Knight of the Reliquary and Ramanop Excavator and so a couple other cards in that vein, and it was just like.
But they kept it. It's going to be there again, and I have no idea what's the point.
You can't win them all.
Yeah, I guess so. But I think that's an easy cut for the future iterations, I guess. Falcon Aristocrat and Rabbit Battery. Those were the two cards that were going really late in the draft, like Alsa of 8, that basically guaranteed to wheel. And they had a very decent win rate, both of them. And to lesser extent, Judith the Scourge Diva had a pretty decent win rate. Well, and maybe Miglos as well in the...
those cards are probably hurting a little because they're multicolored. They get artificially... lengthened where
Rabbit Battery, I have no explanation why it was.
It just looks kind of crappy, though, even though it isn't.
Yeah, probably. But okay, let's not focus on this least desired. Snap picks, and here we go from the general Arena user population into the strictly 17 lands users. These are the cards that are picked a percentage of the time when they are seen by the 17 lands user. And here we get, here we don't have the Meathook Massacre in top 3 cards, but we still have the same top 2. Yeah, we have Lutri. But it's Fable and Shieldred the Apocalypse are the top 2 most picked cards.
People in the right order
half of the time they see it. In the objectively right order as by LSV. Source to Plashers 3rd, which I think objectively also is a decent choice as the best removal in the cube, I guess. And then Bone Crusher, Giant, and Lutri the Spell Chaser. Do you have anything to say about that card?
Oh, I just think it's really funny that 17 lands users have identified that Lutri is awesome, and the general populace not to the same degree. Just be based on these two pieces of information. Lutri is really good. I would almost always take it early. I will say though, it's not like broken. It is very good, but I would take Lightning Bolt over Lutri or Swords to Plowshares over Lutri. I just would rather have efficient spells, though Lutri can be quite strong.
And then we see a bunch of the same. Lightning Bolt, Sublime Epiphany, Goldspan Dragon, Oracle of the Alpha.
Even 17 lands users aren't immune to Oracle of the Alpha's temptations.
37%. 3 out of 8 times they see it.
I've never passed the card, so I can't. I'm not throwing stones here. I'm casting Time Walks is what I'm doing.
Oh, well, that's true. Glorybringer appears on the list together with the Goldspan. So the 5-drop finishers for the mono red, basically both of them are great, and 17 lands users see it. The only thing I see here that slightly changed is that some cards were slightly up, some cards were slightly down, but not that much change. We still see Chandra, we still see Meathook Massacre somewhere there, like 1/3 of the time people pick it. We still see the counterspell, we still see the Key to the Archive, but slightly lower than in the first list. So basically, it's a slightly different order in terms like it's maybe closer to what you would be picking, but not that different from the general population, I would say. The cards that are never picked by 17 lands user, Phyrexian Arena is the least picked card. Only 10% of the time that people see it, it's being picked. And keep that in mind that a card that would be always last picked would have 12.5% pick rate, because that's the number of the cards in the booster. If there was a card that if you pick it, you lose a game, it would have 12.5% pick rate. So 10.6% for Phyrexian Arena. It means that it's both disliked by 17 lands users, but it's also more preferred by people who are not 17 lands users, that they sometimes pick it so that you don't have to, basically.
One big thing on this list, Deathrite Shaman is about to get quite a bit better with fetch lands. I don't know that makes Deathrite into a great card, but it is definitely not something that it had access to before. And fetch lands go a long way in making Deathrite pretty good.
What I see is that definitely there was a preference against green kind of big beater kind of deck. There is the Tranquil Frillback, there is the Ulvenwald Oddity, Inscription of Abundance, if I remember that was the green one, was it? Pelt Collector, Storm the Festival, a bunch of mono green cards on that list that were not picked.
Pelt Collector is kind of like Cenote Scout that we just saw. It's like a 1-mana green aggressive creature that doesn't really fit. So I'm kind of predicting the Scout will be the same, but
yeah, but maybe with the addition of Questing Beast, the Ulvenwald Oddity is going to be slightly more desirable, because if you know that you can get 2 of those, you had some kind of a good plan of a beatdown going. Okay. This is the graph of all the cards in the previous version of the cube, based on what percent of the time were they played when they were picked. And this is just to show you the distribution of the cards. And you see that very few of the cards are played over 90% of the time when they are picked. So almost always included in the deck as soon as they were drafted. There's a bunch of cards that goes into your deck 80% of the time, similar amount when it's over 70% of the time, and it sort of drops off until, like 3/4, 2/3 of the cards are roughly played between 60 and 90% of the time. And then we have a steeper drop off and then steep cliff at the end of it of the cards that were almost never played. And I'm glad to report that most of the cards that were cut from the cube were in this part, the cards that were rarely played, even when they were picked. And you will see what is at the deep end of those cards. This is a quirk of 17 lands data, and you will quickly realize what. But let's look at the cards that were almost always included. And Fabled Passage is the card that was most played. 95% of the time when it was picked, it was played in the deck. I think that potentially 5% is when they were picked and you turned out to be a monocolored deck, I guess.
Yeah, I can't really imagine how that would end up. I mean, obviously, some amount of the time you just have someone playing who doesn't really know what's going on, I guess. I don't know.
I mean, no, is there a point of putting it in a monocolor deck?
If you wanted to shuffle or fill your graveyard.
Oh, maybe.
It's not 0, but I probably wouldn't play it. A tap land with those abilities is not.
Yeah, exactly. Good. Not in the mono red, for example. Like you wouldn't Definitely put it in the mono red. And
I could see like a mono black deck that like. Oh wait, I guess you'd have to have like Delve or something. I don't know. It's kind of weird.
Mono blue with the Brainstorm. Fable of the Mirror Breaker and Bone Crusher Giant and Lightning Bolt. These are the 3 cards that were potentially boosted by the fact that some people were just hard forcing red because it was so open. Then we have Forsaken Crossroads. Do you have anything good to say about this card?
I basically always play it. It's a good card. I actually really like the design space of let's try to put in cards for digital play, especially because there's a lot of room there that are better on the draw than on the play, because the play is ours historically has been such an advantage. So I think that Forsaken Crossroads and other cards like that can be pretty sweet.
Then a bunch of the same swords, Sheldred, and then one category of cards that I think is Paradise Druid and Llanowar Elves make the list, and I think that it's just basically you only pick them when you want to play them kind of cards. That's why they are over 90% of the time they are picked, they are played, because you don't need to prioritize them as hard as you need to prioritize Sheldred or Fable of Mirror Breaker, because they will go much later in the draft. But it's just there's no point of picking them if you don't plan on playing them. So there you go. Oracle of the Alpha made 90% of the deck, so maybe the people are not crazy. Only the win rate was not so great. So
they just wanted to play.
They want to play the Lotus, and they get to play the Lotus. It's like people playing Toxic in Phyrexian LB1 all over again. Go for the Throat, Glorybringer, Goldspan Dragon, Chandra, Crusher of Defiance. All those cards we've seen. Well, not go for the Throat. That may be a surprise that it's been played so frequently when it's being picked. And then Never Includes, with 1.4% of the time played when it was drafted in the deck, Lutrid the Spell Chaser. So 1.4% of the times people put it actually in their main deck and not as a companion, which is potentially a misclick.
Or, again, not understanding what's going on.
Maybe. And There is Karuga, there is Gyruda, there is Yorion. So bunch of companions, because of course they are not being counted as played when they are companioned by 17 lens data and the main 17 lens statistics. That's why they are here. But other cards that are rarely played: Deathrite Shaman, Falconrat Aristocrat, only 30%, despite actually good win rate, as I mentioned before.
I was just checking if Luris was still in. I love Luris.
Luris was in, but Luris was played 65%.
Yeah, you're not going to be able to companion Luris that often, whereas Lutri, obviously, you could always companion.
It probably was like companion roughly 25 to 30% of the time. Because I specifically checked it because I was wondering where Luris was, but it was there. It was just main deck most of the time. And actually, when you look at them, every single card except for Jakob Hauken Inspector on this list is a multicolor card of one way or another. So hybrid or multicolor. Any of those cards that you would be considering playing more frequently or forgettable?
I mean, like I mentioned Deathrite already. I think that Voice of Resurgence, Huntmaster of the Fells, Falconwrath Aristocrat, Rip Apart are all totally fine cards. I don't really see why they would be quite so low. The rest do look kind of bad.
That's probably why they are the never includes. Okay, win rate, and let's look at the game and end win rate, and we can from that we can sort of
black is just
Well, but is it because black was bad, or is it because black was so much overdrafted? You know, if the color is overdrafted, the win rate is going to go down because you have to compete for your color every single time.
Yeah.
But okay, for those that are actually listeners and not viewers, 63% of the cards in red had a win rate of over 56%, which is, you know, above average win rate for a card. Around 50% of the blue and white cards had the same kind of number. 37.5% of green cards, and only 25-ish% of black cards. So only a quarter of black cards crossed that, you know, decent game and hand win rate. And then we have a third of lands that had a over 56% win rate, and 40% multicolor cards, and 20% of the colorless cards. So similar to black. And then when we look at the bad-ish cards with below 54% game and hand win rate, 30% of the black cards are below 54% win rate. Only 6% of red cards had below 54% win rate. Again, largely driven by the fact that red was almost always open, black was almost always overdrafted, plus power level to some extent. It would be very hard to disentangle those two. And then around 20% of the blue, white, and green cards have the win rate of under 54%, and a good 1/3 of the multicolor, and a good 1/3 of the colorless, and only like 20% of lands, which is something to say about the importance of drafting lands. And we've seen in the Alsa that lands were not drafted very highly, and that's maybe you can preach about it.
Third picking Hallowed Fountains and feeling real good about it because I like casting my spells.
Do you like casting your spells?
I do.
There you go. You heard it here first. So now we can go through all the colors and which were the best cards in the previous iteration. I only put the cards that are staying in the current version. I deleted all the cards that were removed so that we don't get confusing data from cards that are not going to be there. But the top card in white in the previous iteration was the Sigarian Evangel, and that's an alchemy card. Do you know what it does?
Oh yeah, I know what this card does. It's really messed up. It's 1 and a white for a 3/1, and when it enters the battlefield, you can tap target permanent, which is pretty nuts because you can also tap their lands. Mostly you just tap their creatures, but also when you play it, it conjures a copy in your hand that you discard end of turn. But what that means though is, so yeah, you know, if you play it on turn 2, you just discard the one in your hand. You don't get anything out of it. But if you have like 6 or 8 mana and you play one, it gets you another one, which when you play it gets you another one, and you just play 3 of these and lock down, and none of the creatures can block. So it's like you spent 6 mana to make it so they couldn't block, and they, you know, they took a bunch of damage, and you put 3 3/1s into play. Like, the card is really good.
Giver of Runes, that was one of the cards on your list. How important is it for mono white?
Yeah, that was just kind of emblematic as like a 1-drop that generally will cost them more mana or time to get rid of, and in a lot of cases they have to kill it. Like, luckily it can't protect itself like Mother of Runes. That's just an abomination of a design. But even Giver, if you're on the draw and they go turn 1 Giver, turn 2, I don't even want to say Luminarch because obviously that's just like game over, or Thalia. But any white 2-drop, even a mediocre one, you now can't kill their attacking creature. You have to kill the giver first, and you often are spending like 2 mana on that. At that point, they now have 2 other creatures in play, and the game kind of spirals out of control. It's a really strong card, and playable 1-drops are huge for aggro decks.
Yeah, and you can see Banalish Night Counselor is another playable 1-drop on the list. There's Esper Sentinel on the list. I mean, Sword is a sort of 1-drop. Apart from that, Adeline, Luminarch Aspirant, Elite Spellbinder, all the kind of like top white creatures, I guess, for the cube in terms of the white aggro, all of them around 60, 58% win rate. Any cards that surprise you on the list?
No, it's kind of funny seeing Mana Tithe slightly ahead of Swords to Plowshares, but I'm not going to be taking Mana Tithe over Swords to Plowshares. I'll tell you that.
I probably wouldn't say, but I guess Mana Tithe is going to almost exclusively be played in the mono white deck, while Swords will be played also in the multicolor subs that have a generally
yes. And once you put non-white cards in your mono white deck, your win rate goes down, I'm sure.
Yeah, probably, unless it's the 1 copy of Lorehold Command. Where am I? Here. Boom. The worst white cards. Felidar Retreat won the worst white card. Exactly what you don't want to do. Mid-rangey, grindy, in a color that doesn't have tools to do that. Seal Away, Settle the Wreckage. Also pretty low win rate.
Yeah.
Ephemerate, just no support for that, I guess. Monastery Mentor.
Man. There was a period of Cube where I drafted Blue-White Blink like 5 or 6 times in a row. I would very frequently draft it. And I liked Ephemerate a lot in those decks, but I can see it not fitting into most white decks.
I see like Wrath of God, Day of Judgment, Realm Cloak Giant, Settle the Wreckage. Is putting Sunfall going to do anything? I mean, it's 1 more Wrath, basically.
Well, so it'll depend on a couple of things. One is maybe they've toned down the aggro decks a little bit, so the non-aggro strategies get a little bit of a boost. The other is I don't always want to be like, well, everyone else is wrong and I'm right. But I do feel like people were not doing a good job of drafting white control decks, and I think they were a valid strategy. So seeing that Wrath and Day of Judgment, have fairly low win rates kind of indicates to me that people were playing them in the wrong decks, not drafting white control decks effectively. I don't know, some combination of those things.
You actually had, from the bit of data that I've seen, you had a couple of white-blue decks there. Is it always Teferi Pile with counter spells and Wraths?
No, it's actually mostly not that. It was mostly like all the ETB creatures and blink effects, and it would have some counters, and I would still play Wrath in these decks, but I think just playing, a good like on the board mid-range deck was actually pretty good. Wrath fits fine in those archetypes. But I basically kind of think Wrath and Day of Judgment are still good, and I think Sunfall will be good too. It just you have to have the right deck for them.
So what cards would you pair them with?
Planeswalkers, is a good combo. Generally not just straight up card draw, because I just don't think card draw is good in Magic anymore. Like they just don't. Like a card that just draws cards is generally not going to be as good as a card that does something else and draws like 1 card. They just tend to print good enough threats at this point. But I liked a blue-white deck that, it would have some counters, have some Planeswalkers, have some Wraths, has creatures with ETB abilities. Like you don't care if you Wrath away your Cloud Blazer or whatever. Just
maybe a complete tangent, but talking about cards that just draw cards, did you see the new mythic from the new set, the new version of Fact or Fiction that makes a flying creature?
Right, where if whatever pile you don't get, it becomes a Thopter of that size.
Yeah. How often is it going to be like 4-1 division when you get either a 4/4 flyer and a busted card, or a 1/1 flyer and 4 cards?
I actually think that design is super sweet. I think it's a really cool design. Yeah. So I'm stoked to get to play it.
What I don't find cool is that Elish Nor Mother of Machine is so bad in the cube.
Yeah, I thought that card was good, but I was drafting Blink at that point. So
that's true. But with Blink, it should be great, yeah, because it doubles your ETBs, no? Lauren of the Third Path probably also was a part of your Blink decks, but maybe not enough targets for it, I guess.
I guess so. I'm kind of surprised. That card seems pretty good, but I guess, maybe if it doesn't have a lot of targets, I could see that.
Okay, best of blue. And the number 1 blue card in the last iteration was Nightclub Bouncer. Do you know what it does?
That's the 2/3, right?
I put it because I had no idea. I never played with that card, so I just put it.
I played with this one.
It looks good. I mean, it's a very good mana warp, basically.
Yeah, the flash on a 2/3 means you can, like, against aggro. I'm not surprised that the win rate's high, because against aggro, you're like, play this, bounce your 3-drop, block your 2-drop, and it's often just like
and your 3-drop becomes
2 for 0.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a 4 mana 2/3 with flash, and when it ETBs, you bounce something to controller's hand, and it costs 2 more mana to cast perpetually. Other cards: Sublime Epiphany, Exclude, Dismiss, Commit Memory, Counterspell, Make Disappear, Repeal, Censor, Disdainful Stroke. I see a certain trend there, like bunch of Counterspell and high win rate. So that makes me think that maybe the 3 mana Counterspell they put from the latest set is not going to be a complete loss of a card in this cube.
No, but if you look, these are all either 2 mana counters, like Counterspell, Make Disappear, Censor, Disdainful Stroke, or 3 mana or 4 mana counters that draw you a card, like Exclude and Dismiss are like 2-for-1s. So Sublime Epiphany is 17 for 1 or whatever. So a 3 mana counterspell that's worse than Exclude is probably, or something along those lines is probably going to be tough. But we'll see.
Oh yeah, but I mean, it's still got that impulse kind of option, and then again, putting stuff in the graveyard with Torrential Gearhulk, potentially one of the good cards, is not a complete nothing either. So other things like creatures that were decent. Apart from the Nightclub Bouncer, we have Brazen Borrower, Torrential Gearhulk, Agent of Treachery, and Frost Titan. Still game. Frost Titan still making it in the top 15 of the blue cards.
Yeah.
Cards that were not so good in blue: Search of Ascanta, Champion of Wits. That was a particularly bad one. It didn't do that much. Teferi Temporal Pilgrim and Mold Drifter. How sad are you to see Mold Drifter being?
Well, this goes back to just raw card draw, not really being where you wanted to be, I don't think.
Other things: Multiple Choice, Baral, Chief of Compliance. I think that card was
really hard to use, right? Well,
but
look, here you see like Disallow as a 3 mana counter with like some upside of counter and triggered abilities, and it still just like was on the low side. Vendilion Click, I'm a little surprised, but I guess it's really bad against aggro.
Yeah, I guess that Brazen Borrower is just better. And Brainstorm hopefully will become slightly better if you have a couple of fetch lands. Because,
definitely.
Again, Brainstorm was maybe as a part of the cube tradition, but actually there is little support for playing Brainstorm in this format.
Now you have Chimmel, the Inner Sun. You can brainstorm back that Time Warp, and then next turn cast Chimmel, and boom.
Oof. Dear me. Wow, you're already cooking. I think you're ready to play that cube.
Oh yeah.
Best black cards, and actually surprising to me, the highest win rate black card was Breach the Multiverse.
I'm a little surprised by that.
Shieldred is second, and then but what you can see is that the win rates of the best black cards are not that high.
The win rate, the win rates of the best black cards, the win rates of the worst white cards are like comparable.
Worst white card on my list was 58%. Worst blue card was 57.6%. And third black card is sort of at the level of the worst white card on my list from the good white cards. And fourth black card is roughly the same as the last blue card on the list. So there's very disproportionate. The 3 top cards, Breach, Shieldred, and Gix's Command, are pretty good. And then it just drops off to around 56, which is nothing to be amazed about, honestly. So a testament to the black not being powerful and at the same time overdrafted, I would guess.
Yeah, I guess so. People just love their removal spells.
I don't even see the Go for the Throat on the list, and that was one of the most played black cards, and just like not appearing here. But maybe it will be more interesting to look at the worst black cards.
Ooh, Phyrexian Arena, the first card to dip under 50%.
Congratulations. What do we have here? bunch of removal, really. We have Black Sun's Twilight. There is Drowned in Ichor.
I'm a little surprised that Gonti and Languish are both here on the worst list, but
I'm not surprised about Gonti, to be fair. But and honestly, if Wrath of God and Day of Judgment were in the bottom
true,
white
that's
cards,
kind of the
you
same thing.
expect Languish.
It might be worse here anyway because Black has so many creatures. So like putting Languish in your deck was just not a good idea.
Yeah, I was slightly surprised by Deadly Dispute. I thought that this card might have a slightly better numbers, but maybe there's no synergy with it again. Best red cards, and obviously the best red card was Kumano Faces Kakazan, but that's cut from the cube. Then we have a bunch of cards that you would expect to see: Lightning Bolt, Fable, Goldspan Dragon. Then you have Molten Impact. That's one of the alchemy cards that deal 4 damage, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and the excess damage is saved for the next time you play a spell.
Exactly. And then Zealous Conscripts. That's also an alchemy card, is it? I don't even know. Zealous
Conscripts? No, that's just a card from Avacyn Restored or whatever.
Oh, wow.
It's an old one. The 5-mana 3/3 steals a creature, or permanent rather, until end of turn.
Okay. Then you have Bone Crusher, Inferno Titan, Monastery Swift Spear,
Rabbit Battery.
Yeah, there you go. Legion War Boss won me the Ravnica Remastered draft. Still good in any format. Hellrider, Emerald Creek, Glorybringer, Rekindling Phoenix. Like a bunch of 1-drop, some removal, and a bunch of the top end from red decks, which is a bit surprising that there's so much of this top end on the list. But I guess that you play maybe 2-3 of those top end cards, and they will be always good if you have them.
Yeah.
In hand, because you probably most of the time will be able to cast them. Worst red card, Dragon Master Outcast. I honestly have no idea what that card is. Probably for the good. That's
the 1-mana 1/1 that if you have 6 lands, it makes a 5/5. At the beginning of your upkeep.
Okay, one of the 1-drops that you don't want to be playing. And then Fight with Fire, Brotherhood's End, Mishra's Command, Terror of the Peaks. Just not good enough of the top end because it needs to survive 1 turn, I guess. Young Pyromancer, not good in the cube, at least. Burn Down the House. Krenko, that's a bit surprising. Krenko, you would think maybe in the aggro decks would be decent.
Yeah, some of these cards are reflective of the blue-red style decks not being that good, like Young Pyromancer, even Fight with Fire, Burn Down the House, that sort of thing.
Magmatic Channeler, I guess, another one.
Light Up the Sage didn't do it. I guess you just want to put more creatures into play.
I guess. Who needs draw when you can drain your opponent's life total? Green cards. And here we have slightly better than the black. The absolute top is Nissa, Who Shakes the World at 60%. That's the contender for one of the best cards in the whole cube. Then we have a couple of 59% win rate cards in Vorin Legs, Menagerie, Curator, Essica's Chariot. And then we have a bunch of top end and ramp. So Crater Hoof, Titan of Industry, Kogla, the Titan Ape, Voracious Hydra. These are the top ends. And apart from that, you got Llanowar Visionary, Llanowar Elves, Armored Scrap Gorger, Elvish Mystic, Gilded Goose. So all the mana dorks, basically. So shows to me that the strategy for playing green in this was ramp, and put big things. Now we're going to get a couple of, apart from Questing Beast, also Elder Gargoroth is being put into cube and was not there before. So I think that archetype might get slightly boosted.
Yeah, both those look quite a bit better than most of the cards on this list, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. And you got Essica's Chariot and Questing Beast are going to be pretty decent as a 4-drop to play on turn 3. And then the rest can stay the same. You can probably play the same kind of a ramp strategy. Maybe, if you get Halana Alena, you can put that thing in your deck. If you get something in black, you can put this. And I don't know exactly what are the best pairs for the green decks in the cube, but it looks like, ramping is the way to go. The bad green card, Toski, the Bearer of Secrets. If you slam with an 8/8, it doesn't matter that you draw a card, I guess. That's the sort of long story short, you don't play the go wide green strategies in this cube. Other things, bunch of those grindy kind of value mid-range cards are on there. Oracle of Muldaya, Timeless Witness, Briarbridge Tracker, Augur of Autumn, Tireless Tracker. All of those cards are just not that great, it seems.
I'm a little surprised, but I could buy it.
Surprised or hurt?
I found these cards to be decent, but I will say that Courser and Oracle do feel like a bit slow for these days. I do like a Tireless Tracker, but I guess if you don't have any extra land plays, it's a little bit dicey as well.
Tranquil Frillback. That's actually probably the card that surprises me the most as not good, because that card can generate quite a lot of value.
Yeah,
but I don't know. Maybe it was not picked right into the right decks. Yes. Best multicolor cards: Archangel Avacyn.
yeah, real multicolor there.
Well, it's counted in the 17 lands category as a multicolor card. But apart from that, Colligan Command and Falconrat Aristocrat. Teferi is still good. The 5-mana Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. A bunch of black-red, which Crucia's Broadtide Harvester, Cut Ribbons, showing that actually maybe the best red color combination was not red-white, but red-black. But we also do get Showdown of the Skulls. So there are some white-red cards. Reflector Mage, Miglos, Etali, which is sort of moderate, but okay. Garruk, Prismari Command, and Judith the Scourge Diva. So mainly Rakdos cards on that list in terms of the best. And all of them stay in the cube. So I guess that potentially red-black is still going to be good. The worst, Knight of the Reliquary. Congratulations at 43% win rate. That's an achievement that requires a slow clap. Any cards here that are surprising to you? I mean, Toxrill is technically not multicolor, but it does count as a multicolor.
Yeah, all of these look like they're fairly bad. I mean, Golos has definitely some dreams associated with it, but for the most part, you just don't want to spend this much mana on stuff.
Glissa Sunslayer.
I like Thief of Sanity in the right deck, but yeah, same with Glissa. Like those are both totally playable cards.
Quick question is there the right deck?
I could still imagine a blue-black deck that has like Duress, Fatal Push kind of cards, but if you can't get the early plays, then yeah, Thief isn't going to help you much there.
Okay, best colorless card is the boat. Sovereign, the boat. Sky Sovereign Consul's Skyship. Mishra's Bauble, another one. But actually, look at those numbers. They are not super impressive.
Yeah.
So around 57, 56, we go down to 55% the Warm Power Stone. So clearly the best three cards are the Sky Sovereign, Mishra's Bubble, and Reckoner Bankbuster. And I think that these are the ones that should probably prioritize if you play any color, really, because they're colorless. And then you have a bunch of sort of colorless ramp things like Mind Stone, Cold Steel Heart, Solemn Simulacrum. And apart from Worn Power Stone also maybe, and then you got like Emrakul. There must be a deck that Emrakul can be played in, but I don't know if you have it. The worst colorless card is the Immortal Sun. It stays in the cube, so now you have this and the Chimil, which I think that they're both.
Seems like a bit much, but yeah, I guess we get both.
Work on Engine, not good enough. I don't know. Maybe put in the wrong decks because it looks like a decent 6-mana kind of drop. Maybe there's just not enough fast ramp for playing it, or.
Yeah, I haven't. The problem with it is if you play it and they have a bounce or exile, you basically lose the game on the spot, and it's a 6-mana card. In this world, I think that's tough. There are some matchups where it could be good, but it's gonna be a liability a lot of the time.
Stonecold Serpent, I guess that just like the rate is not good enough on that creature in the current economy.
You would need for Stonecold to be good for there to be a lot of either artifact synergies, which there really aren't, or to be playing against someone where like the protection kind of stuff really matters.
Or maybe some counter synergy, which is also not present. And then Key to the Archive and Hedron Archive have both similar kind of numbers, which shows you that those 4-mana ramp spells are not exactly.
Yeah, you just need to be playing a card that's good on 4, not a card that sets you up to play a card that's good.
It's funny that the Mazemind Tome is like 54% win rate, and then Bankbuster 57% win rate.
At the end of it, you get 4 life off of Mazemind Tome. Off Bankbuster, you get a treasure and a pilot, and it's a vehicle. So yeah, a little different, I would say.
Best lands. And there are lands that have a significantly higher win rate.
Oh, wait, so the mono red land, then the mono red land, then the red land you play in mono red. Okay.
Yeah, so basically creature lands are the top 3 lands in general. But even later, the Cave of the Frost Dragon, which is the mono-white creature land, is also quite high, which makes me hope that those creature land that they put from Wilds of Eldraine are going to be playing decently, at least. Because also, like in the top lands, we still see the Hive of the Eye Tyrant, for example. Yeah. Otawara also makes the list of the top lands, and a bunch of this fixing lands, Cliff of Retreat, Self Falls, Glacial Fortress. Surprisingly, those are having higher win rates than the shocklands. Just as a general
reflection of how aggressive the cube is, I suppose.
Potentially. We still see like Sacred Foundry in there, but I mean that's the most aggressive color combination of the shockland. Yeah. Maybe you're the beat down sufficiently not to care that much. And Forsaken Crossroads and Fable Passage, both of those are just great to be picked into any deck, basically. No. The lands that underperformed, Field of the Dead was definitely 49%, and then a bunch of shocklands and triumphs in this list. So we have the Temple Garden. There's the Indrathra Triumph, Jetmir's Garden, Zathras Proving Ground, Zagoth Triumph, Spara's Headquarters, and then bunch of the fixing lands, mainly the ones that come into tapped or are shocklands. Which I don't know if the new iteration is going to be maybe slightly less aggressive and maybe shocklands are more viable, but plus we get fetchlands, which may increase the value of the shocklands. So it's quite hard for me to know if the shocklands are going to be better this time around or maybe not. Do you got any feelings on that?
My guess is they get a little bit better with fetchlands. I don't see how that would be. Like it could open the door to some good 3-color decks. Which
what would help? More people draft red.
Yeah, that would help too.
And the last sort of slide from the data. Then maybe you can have a couple of comments in general. But these were the cards that make or break the deck, and by that I mean that they have highest improvement when drawn, which most of the time means that the deck has a decent win rate when the card is drawn, and pretty bad when it's not drawn. So that's why I thought that these cards are a particular category on their own in the cube, because in the cube you might want to know that there are those cards that are amazing when you draw them and maybe build in the deck in a way that you will draw them more frequently than not. And number one here is Antraxa Grand Unifier. It increases the win rate when you draw it by 9.3 percentage points.
I mean, if you built a deck that can cast Atraxa or somehow do something with Atraxa, then mostly cast in this cube, then if you don't draw it, I could see how that would be a problem. But it is very good when you get it into play.
Yeah, no, I'm playing Domain in Standard, and usually it gets the job done when you cast it. Sublime Epiphany, that's a bit of a surprise to me that card is so important for its respective deck. But I guess that if you drew it, you probably cast it because when you make a deck like that, you probably survive till turn 6, and when you cast it, you get so much value out of it that it's not very far from actual Atraxa in terms of how much value it will generate. Any cards on that list that are particularly interesting for you?
I mean, I can just see like Breach the Multiverse, Atraxa, Sublime Epiphany. These all make sense. Shieldred probably saves bad black decks, and landing a good exclude is really brutal. So I could see that. I understand why that's like that.
I was surprised about seeing Solemn Simulacrum on the list.
Maybe they drafted a 5-color expensive deck, and Solemn is the only thing keeping them in the game.
I guess so. Memory Deluge, another thing that definitely blue control decks will be doing fine by having. Right. This is it. I mean, this is the amount of slidage I prepared. Do you have any other comments on the general cube strategy or on how you would advise people to approach this particular cube?
I would start by assuming aggro is still good. So you could, if you're into that, definitely draft it. I also would start by I think mid-range can be successful. Just got to keep a low curve. Prioritize 1 and 2 mana plays, removal, interaction, and then don't worry about getting your 4, 5s, and 6s. You'll get plenty of those if you need them, and they're mostly created equal. Like if you land a 5 mana spell, it's gonna be good for you. Obviously, there's some that stand out, like Shieldred or Nissa, who are like kind of ahead of the rest. But mostly, I aim for a efficient mid-range strategy, and then that, depending on the draft, you could either downcycle the curve and go more aggressive, and you just end up with an aggro deck, or go a little bit higher and end up with a slightly more controlling deck. But you don't want to go too high.
How would you draft lands?
I would be taking fetches and shocks pretty early, but I'd have to get in the cube to find out exactly how. I know in Vintage Cube, they're in about the top, like about the 20th best card in the cube is a fetch land, I think. Something along those lines, maybe 20 to 25th best card-ish. Whereas in the Arena Cube here, I could see them being right. Yeah, the tier after all of the best cards, the Lightning Bolt, Fable, Swords to Plowshares, Shieldred type cards.
All right. Well, I guess that we can end here. And obviously, thank you very much for being a guest. Do you have anything that you want to plug? Your YouTube channel with like a bunch of Vintage Cube?
Yeah, I'm LS-Vargas on YouTube. I put up a video every day, almost always Cube, but not always. I put up the Arena Open Day 2 just today, actually. And, I enjoy doing those. So if you want to check it out, feel free to.
Anywhere else we can find you? I know Twitter.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at LSV. And I write for Channel Fireball, do videos for them. So you can also always check out my work there as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. And obviously, thanks to 17 Lands, because without them, I wouldn't have much to do. I guess during my streams, I would just make empty graphs with no bars in them and lines disappearing. But also thanks to Fake Jake Brown, which again is misspelled here, because why wouldn't I correct the writing? Who is helping me with releasing it in the podcast version. Thanks to mtgazone.com for sponsoring me. And thanks to my patrons, who are very useful indeed to keep my motivation at least acceptable level. And with that, see you next week, when I'm definitely going to look at some cards from the new set, and maybe even we should get the full spoiler on Friday, no? Oh, no, definitely. Maybe next stream might be even the Skeleton Crew with Jason ILTG and a bunch of others talking about our deck skeletons. So that's going to be exciting. Maybe some basic data on the new set before it's actually released. But with that, see you next week. And have fun till then.